So Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien starts under your bed when you're a kid. You're staring up at the ceiling but thinking about nothing other than what might be slithering just 2 feet under your head ready to attack. It starts in that fear that every single one of us harbors in the most protected compartment of our souls. It starts in the fear of the unknown. When we catch up with the crew of Nostromo, they're waking up from their hibernation stasis in a tiny little corner of the infinite. Mother, the onboard ship's computer, has received what seems to be an SOS transmission, and the mission's protocol, though they're just a cargo ship, requires them to investigate. After some bureaucratic infighting, they agree to double park their spaceship on a planet whose environment proves to be primordial. In a glaring turn of coincidence, they've landed miraculously close to what appears to be a broken down alien vessel. With their own ship damaged during the landing, the crew sets out on foot to investigate while the onboard mechanics make the necessary repairs. The explorers find the strange and wondrous remnants of the failed alien mission, and during the expedition, one of the crew is attacked by a crab-like something or other that wraps itself around his face and refuses to let go. The crew is afraid of contamination, but they eventually let him back on board with the spindly sucker still attached to his puss. This proves to be a grave mistake indeed, and for the rest of the film, the crew deals with the onboard terror the facehugger brings along with it. In one of the most terrifying scenes ever filmed, the facefucker spawns and its hostile progeny escapes into the bowels of the ship. Rattled and fighting amongst themselves, the crew attempts to track the alien bastard down and kill it, but it quickly becomes evident that the hunters have become the hunted. What's most striking about all this is the film's simplicity. What we have is essentially a tale that stretches across who knows how many light years, and the grandest existential implications, and it all happens essentially in 3 or 4 rooms of beeping lights. The narrative construct of Alien is so simple, in fact, that if you took away the space stuff, what you'd be left with is the formula of that simplest of all genre pictures, the slasher film. For most of the film, we hardly even see the xenomorph itself, aside from shadowy intimations and small sections of anatomy, and most of the deaths happen off-screen. Leaning on fantastic special effects, cinematography, and production design, Scott knows how to use the devices of mainstream commercial cinema to great effect. And though most of these can be faulted as being hackneyed cliches, he gets them to work in the context of a common denominating bit of mindless blockbuster. But this is a compliment. Who else could use the search for a cat as a major narrative thrust and not have it become utterly ridiculous? But like I said, the real power of the picture comes in the fear of the unknown and the unseen. As adults, our boundaries are stretched beyond our childhood bedrooms, and our imaginations, if we're blessed, grow bigger than our dreams. As a species, we've traveled across continents and across great seas in efforts to come to terms with that unknown. And of course, we look with wondrous trepidation to the stars and planets and black holes and quasars and whatever the hell else might be lurking above our heads. But we can never, ever, not in a Google's of light years, be able to completely come to terms with space. Any answers we find will only bring with it a host of new, potentially horrifying questions. Out there, anything can happen. And the most terrifying part of that anything are the things that we can't even begin to dream of. Well, Ridley Scott dared to try, and came up with a damn good way to while away a hot summer afternoon. So, Billy, you're our science whiz, and the tag of the film is this: in space, no one can hear you scream, but evidently you can hear it loud and clear when your ship explodes behind you, carrying an alien. Is that true?
That's a scientific fact. That's been proven. It was there in the movie, man. Of course, it has to be real.
So how could they put the tagline as "no one can hear you scream in space," but then have a gigantic explosion happen right at the end of the film?
You are immediately getting sidetracked in unimportant minutia, Joe.
I guess that might be the case, man. Well, you know, the thing is that the film does do a lot of things with bigger, grander scale things, as I mentioned on there. But you know,
we talked about it years ago, and your biggest beef has always been the essential sort of cheeseball nature of everything beneath the surface, which is, for instance, there is not one but 2 cats jumping out to scare people in the movie. And it's like, you're on a spaceship, you go all the way to the ends of the cosmos, and your 2 of your biggest scares are a cat jumping out. It's like cliches travel well, don't they?
Well, you expect the first cat.
Right.
It's the second one that really takes you off guard.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean the whole film is basically built around them looking for the cat, and somehow it's actually works really well as a pretty damn good film. Even though I have my issues with it, obviously, but again, like Artie was saying earlier, I mean it kind of seeped into my childhood world and kind of never let go, and it became a part of my own mythology in a lot of ways.
Yeah, do you, I mean, is it to the point where uh like you have a soft spot for the movie, or I mean, do you look at it now and it's just pretty much you view it with objective eyes and it's not.
No, I have. I mean, I have my childhood associations with it for
Mm,
sure, and they actually incorporate, my parents because I remember my parents talking about the film, and then being allowed, incremental access to the film because they used to play it on HBO all the time. And one of
they would
those,
dole out like 5 minute clips at a time.
yeah, and I remember actually, my father and mother joking about, the everyone's seen it, so it doesn't matter about the spoiler. Is that scene at the dinner table,
Mm.
and all this stuff, and then finally seeing it, and even knowing sort of maybe what was going to happen, based on their jokes, it still scared the ever living shit out of me,
Yeah, it's hard
as
not
a
to. The
kid.
first time you see that, nothing really prepares you for
Mm.
seeing it as it actually happens, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, and honestly, I think it's a solid film. As I think pretty much all the Alien films that I've seen, I think are solid films. Prometheus included, by the way.
Hmm.
But I mean, it's there's just a limit to how far it can get when it's in the hands of such a commercial director.
Yeah.
It's not going to transcend like its predecessors, 2001 or even Star Wars.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't seem on that level to
It's
me.
thrown a bucket down to a different set of waters, a little bit, in both those cases. I think not in a bad way. I think it stands head and shoulders above its own company, but it's not,
Mhm.
it's not over in that other company to a certain extent, you know. Ash, what's your associations with the movie?
Well, they did a great job with concentrating on a subgenre, which I think was good for them, especially in the 70s when you had a lot of science fiction. The film's peers obviously set a huge, huge bar at
For
that point in
instance.
time. When you're looking at something like Star Wars,
Mm,
77,
Right.
coming out with something that is totally science fiction, something that doesn't have such a dark turn as Alien, is going to get compared directly to Star Wars. Looking something like 2001. These are science fiction spectacle films that are still revered today,
hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's enabling a science fiction film to sort of capitalize on it being a subgenre and bringing the horror into it was, I think, a really good, um, production decision. My association with it are probably the same as yours. This was a film that was sort of, as a kid, one of those whispered, hushed films that would appear on cable,
Right.
where, again, you were piecemealed the whole thing. You saw it in increments. This is what you were able to watch. This is when it came on at a specific time, so you had this much of the movie that you were able to digest.
All right.
And the whole idea of the film having, elements that were very mysterious, especially looking at this gunner alien, this huge sort of giant alien, and the origins of it were unsure.
The
The whole
space
movie had
jockey.
that. Yeah, the space jockey. Yeah. So having those mysterious elements when you were a kid was even more mysterious because you're not even seeing the film in its totality. You're not seeing it as a whole.
Mm.
So you're wondering if any of this is going to be answered. You're wondering where it's coming from. You're really looking for answers for all these things. Especially the younger mind thinks that you're going to find it in the movie. That it's not
I
just
remember
speculative fiction.
when I would finally see movies after seeing pieces like that, often I was disappointed because the whole did not add up. I mean, just seeing a clip, your imagination sort of sprawled out in both directions before and after, and often I
Right.
was disappointed when I finally saw the entire film. Was that the case with Alien?
I think maybe my child brain just kept looking for answers. I actually looked through old issues of Famous Monsters of Filmland. That's when I became associated with Giger's work and really started looking at what he had done. And for me, it was like this quest. How can I find out more about this? And my own mind was sort of filling in the blanks as I went. The more that I found, the more I sort of created my own backstory. So I don't think with me it was so much disappointment. It was just a very long creative exercise.
Yeah, I mean, it engaged your imagination, so you wanted to look further into it, and that's a great thing. That's a great quality in a
I
film.
remember my first exposure to it was actually in we my dad had subscribed to these they really don't have them anymore. It's such an artifact of the past. These
Right.
like an almanac almost.
Hmm.
And anyway, it's like a yearbook for popular culture, and so this used to come in every year like clockwork. And I remember looking back at old ones from 1979 and seeing pictures of Alien as the blockbuster of the year. And there was just this picture of these astronauts in what looked like the interior rib cage of some slimy monster, and it completely blew away any conception I had of what a film could be, because I was like, what is that? Like, it was instantly terrifying to me just to look at that photo, you know?
Well,
Mm.
the
And
imagery was so foreign.
it was literally out of this world. No one had ever seen anything like that, not in a
Yeah.
Star Wars movie or anything. And it was so well done and so controlled that just by virtue of looking at it, you were put into another frame of mind, you know?
Yeah, and that should bring up the discussion about the designer of the alien and the
The,
interior of that
the
spaceship,
great Giger.
Giger. Yeah, jeez, man. I mean, he's responsible for exactly what you're saying, man. I mean, the design of the monster and the design of that ship is just, I mean, it's just the work of a fine artist and not a Hollywood hack, you know.
Well, it's I mean, everyone can do themselves a favor by renting the Alien, what do they call it, the quadrilogy or whatever. There's
Hmm.
bonus
Right.
material discs, and the one on Alien is a real pleasure to watch. And in it, it talks about, Ash, you brought this up earlier. Dan O'Bannon had a book of Giger's paintings, and this is an interesting bit of trivia. Dan O'Bannon had spent about 2 years in Paris, long before Alien, working on an adaptation of Dune with Jodorowsky, the guy who
Hmm.
made El Topo and
Yeah.
Santa Sangre. And it was at
Yep.
that point that he actually came across Giger's paintings because Giger had been in talks to design the world of Dune. And so flash forward a couple of years, and Ridley Scott sat down and Dan O'Bannon pushed a book of Giger's paintings across the desk and said, "This is it." And Ridley Scott looked at the painting of the creature. It's a famous painting. I don't remember the name of
Ne
it.
Necromicon 4
That's
or something like that.
that's the one, and I mean, it's pretty much verbatim, like right out of that painting, you
Yeah.
know?
Yep. Yep.
It's a real, I mean, it's a tribute to Scott too, that he recognized something beautiful in that painting and just made it happen in front of a camera, you know?
Yeah, and it became the basis. I mean, it became the generator of the whole film. And you know, I mean, it's a testament to Scott's taste or his ability to manipulate the craft of the mechanisms of cinema that he instead of taking a beautiful looking design like that and showing it as much as possible, he kept it hidden away for 90% of the film. And even when you see it, it's shrouded in, it's lit so darkly that you're always wanting to see what it is. It's a great approach to shooting a monster.
And in the few shots that show more of it, you know, as Scott himself said, you know, the more you show it, the more full length you show it, you know, it robs it of mystery. And that's, I mean, the brilliant thing that he did about that is to leave the mystery in the dark corners.
Yeah, and you're always looking for, you're just always looking for it. And the fact that it changes, I think Ebert pointed this out. I'm not gonna just claim this observation. I claim my own when I have them. But well, Ebert pointed out that what's so brilliant about it is that it's shrouded in darkness and and shot off screen most of the time. And even while it's that, it changes in form. So
Yeah, you
so
can't
not
even
only
mentally get a
can't you see
grasp
it,
on.
but you can't even imagine what it's becoming, or became, and it's just like I kind of point out in the review, it's the fear of the unknown, and not only is it the unknown of what's out there in space and everything, but it's the unknown of the actual monster.
Yeah, Yeah, and I mean, as an example of what exactly what you're talking about, and Scott doing it right, and another director doing it wrong, or could have done it wrong, especially compared to the film surrounding it. Robert Aldrich, was an amazing director. He directed The Dirty Dozen and a handful of other. I think he might have directed that great Mickey Spillane movie, Kiss Me Deadly.
Oh
Double
yeah,
check
that's
that
a
one.
great
But
one. Yeah.
old timey Hollywood director, and when he was attached to the project, he was asked how he would handle the face hugger scene, and he said, "Easy, I'll go down to the butcher shop and get a liver, and I'll just throw it at the guy's face."
Oh, that's
And
funny.
it's like,
Yeah,
wow, no wonder like Alien was just so far ahead of its time. Like it just burst out of the entire mold of filmmaking at the time. Like even after Star Wars, people were trying to mimic it, and it was coming out looking like things like Logan's Run, and you
right.
know.
Yeah, the creature itself, though, when you look at the design, I think that was one of the aspects we look at this mystery. It was a very androgynous design as far as the sexuality of it. It had both masculine and feminine elements to it. So this is something that was it just left you uneasy. And so many directors, they don't pull their punches to the point where it, they show it partially, or we're getting a very well established shot now that's meant to shock and meant to terrify. And
Right.
with that, we weren't really looking at quintessentially what a monster would be. We're looking at something that is just so foreign and so alien to us
Right.
that by
Because
nature it
monster
becomes a monster.
Yeah, because monsters, traditionally in horror and everything, they're usually some hybrid or malformed human, and here there's not even eyes that you can really
I
see.
This is the first time I really noticed. I mean, almost as if it had been, no pun intended, staring me in the face all this time. There's no eyes on the face of that monster.
Hmm.
And there's
Right.
again background footage shows that they actually. This is also the first time I noticed that part of the horror of it is that it's very human-like, but it's a distorted human form underlying the structure of everything. They actually
Yeah.
had a sculpture of a human skull under the surface of the
Yeah, I
creature's
heard about that.
face. So it's
Yeah.
built on human features, and that just elicits such a revulsion in the viewer.
Well, it's also very consciously playing on our subconscious, Ash. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of this. You know, everything that Giger is it Giger? Is that how you pronounce
Yeah,
it? Giger.
H.R. Giger.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with putting phalluses
Oh
and
yeah, totally.
vaginas and all this stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, do you want to recount all the ways that their primordial ooze throughout the
Well,
whole friggin' film?
it's all about insertion and penetration.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
You know, this isn't just something that's has the quality of ripping you apart. This is something that has the quality of getting inside you. You
Hmm.
know, the threat during the earlier part of the film was this is something that can enter you and gestate, and then
Mm,
we get our monster. So the horror
yeah.
here is really twofold. It's parasitic. It's this thing that sort of gets inside you and penetrates you, and it sort of takes your power away. And then once it's outside, it has this other threat. Now it's a different threat. Now it's taken what it needed from you, became even stronger.
I
Right.
never really thought about that before, but it's very much, yeah. I mean, thematically, it's almost it's a marriage of Giger's artwork and the themes of the film. Obviously, no wonder Dan O'Bannon, fell in love with Giger's paintings. But it's the looping back in on itself, not only of sexuality but of digestion, and
Yeah.
the fact that something can burst out of you and then turn around and eat you. Like insects. There's a lot of insects that do that. They turn around and they eat the mother after they've been born, or the one of the great horrors of my childhood is reading about wasps that put an egg inside of a caterpillar. The egg bursts and then it eats its way from the tail to the head, saving the head for last because it needs the creature to keep eating to provide nutrients. So it eats its way up to the front.
That
God,
should
that
be a
is truly
cautionary
horrifying.
tale for marriage.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of marriage, this is the other theme of the movie is birth. Did you
Right.
guys and really
Well,
I
rape,
think
yeah.
there
Yeah.
see, and this is why I
Start first is rape and then it's
the
birth, I
first
think.
this is the first time I viewed the film because it's been about 10 years since I've seen this original Alien, and I think genius underlying it all is that it shows a series of life cycles from beginning to end. And there's, I mean, obviously the guy is basically raped on the planet and then gives birth to a monster. But what did you guys? I mean, how did you feel about that? I really felt that there was a whole series of cycles of digestion and, you know, sex and birth basically taking place, almost like a ritual, you know?
I just
Yeah,
want to use the term face rape. I I think it has a ring to it.
I think I put face fucking into, into my review, which is
That
very,
was very
I
kind of
mean,
you to cut that out and then bring it back up later.
yeah, I mean, listen, man, when Billy in Prometheus, you felt violated by the filmmaker, but if this isn't, I mean, you just feel violated by the actual film in this, you know, in this one and that, uh, you know, you can't look at this without you know, cringing and feeling, you know, yeah, that's it, raped and taking control of. I mean, when that guy has the face hugger on his face and he's just lying there, prostate and just unconscious. I mean, that's just. I remember seeing that when I was a kid and just not even knowing
How to process that mentally.
how to come to terms with it, man. You know, I mean, it's terrifying. You know,
And one of the great design features of that is its two hands, basically, you
right?
know, and it just feels that you instinctively feel the horror of that, you know?
Yeah, like you could feel those bones in
Yeah.
there, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Even the way that the kills take place, we're looking at something that is essentially animal. It's and not even so predatory, to be honest with you, because when you look at a lot of monsters in cinema, these are monsters that stalk their prey. These are monsters where we're running from them. Where this is something where it's in wait, it's in hiding. You know, it's
Hmm.
animal, but it seems to have this very elusive quality to it, where,
More
you know,
spider-like.
right, exactly. You know, and I think that was also something that really heightened the tension was it's not as if you're being chased. You're not being ran down.
Hmm.
You know, this is where it's a consequence of being at the wrong place at the wrong time.
I almost feel like it's showing the creature is just sort of the middle ground in a range of biological processes where it's almost like the ship. I mean, obviously the ship is called Mother, right? So there's a
Hmm.
metaphor right there, but there's the metaphor of creating artificial life or creating life in general, which is sort of pops up again in Prometheus. But man has created the ship, but then it inhabits the ship. So men are already the parasites, humans are already the parasites in the belly of the ship, right? And then it
Hmm.
sets down and it picks up the ultimate STD when one group of germs from one ship pass over to another ship. And so there's a biological exchange there, only they pick up again the ultimate STD and get back on the ship, and the infection basically destroys Mother. So
Yeah, it's kind of like a really drunk night after, you know, picking somebody up at a bar and there's all sorts of fluids and stuff being exchanged. It
that's
just gets really
You know what?
nasty.
That's exactly what I felt like after watching this movie last time.
I know. I mean, yeah,
Dirty
it's
floor of a
all this
bar.
it's just this messy biological, you know, slime. There's all slime and fluids everywhere and
All
things.
that slime, by the way, KY jelly.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean, it's all, you know, yeah, it's just icky. You feel like you need to take a shower after, you know.
Well, I mean, I got pretty, I geeked out on it pretty heavily this time around. I mean, even the finale is, uh, Ripley basically being born from the ship, you know, like she's running down the canals of the ship, you know, all those corridors are like the birth canal.
Right, right.
She jumps in the escape pod and is jettisoned right before the ship explodes. So it's like the fear of childbirth also because the
Mm,
guy dies giving birth to the alien and then the ship dies giving
right,
birth to Ripley, you know?
right,
Like
right.
I mean, I think this is why the film stands after all these years because it has these really beautiful symmetries underlying everything, you know?
Yeah, well, there's something definitely there's something really powerful underlying it that doesn't really need all that much explanation, and the fact that it just all happens right there in a ship, it's just like a little concentrated, little petri dish of organisms to see how they're gonna infiltrate one
Yeah,
another, create other things,
yeah.
and it's so much a part of our horror of what listen, Ash, do you have kids?
I've got one on the way.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
So
This
you're
is the
just about
perfect
to,
film for you to
I
study.
swear. that's, that's great, Ash, because you're gonna experience this you said any moment now. That's right. Listen, when you're in that birthing room, and the needles come out and they're being injected and painkillers into backs, and then things are opening up and spilling out, and cuts, and oh,
I think there's
This
going to
all
be a
sounds
lot of
very exciting.
pointing and exclaiming, "What is that?" Yeah.
yeah.
I have a feeling that that's going to be my role in the birthing room.
Yeah, I mean, it is, that birthing room is really like
An alien
I couldn't, it's like an alien movie. And I think I even said it was like an alien, like I said it was like a Cronenberg movie.
You
And,
did describe that to me once as an alien life form struggling to be born into this universe.
it is, man. I mean, and these are the things that, that we don't, you don't talk about that stuff really, unless you're on a podcast talking to thousands of
Well, because
people.
it's beautiful, but there's just such a huge concentration of violence. You're
Right.
watching this fantastic process, but at the same time, it's a very violent one. It's a very gory one.
I mean,
Right.
for me, like reviewing all of these films, the thing that I feel that they tapped, and this is the reason for their, survival in culture, is they tapped a human like feeling of self-loathing in a way, in that we really are like the more we become quote unquote civilized and the more we reflect upon our own existence, the more horrific basic biological functions are going to feel,
Hmm.
And Alien is nothing but an endless violent succession of
Bio
yeah, of
nuts.
biological processes.
Yeah. So you're saying basically that as we become more and more civilized, and we try to forget about
Try to be
our
cleaner and neater, and we use hand sanitizer, and we
right,
shave the hair off of ourselves and
flush everything
flush
away nice
everything
and
away so
neatly
to
out of,
see it.
and the birth, you don't look at it, you're not catching it directly,
And then a
you
movie
just
like Alien comes along, and it just, I mean, it's a Freud, again, it's Freud, Freud brought to light in Viennese culture all the horrific things that everyone was doing and weren't admitting. And a movie
right.
like Alien just brings it right back up to it's it's the
Right.
monster that gets flushed down the toilet and then crawls back up the kitchen sink.
Right, just gets right back down to the disgustingness of being human, basically.
Yeah.
Uh, You know. Well, we should talk about Sigourney Weaver.
Ash,
I
I,
mean, this
I
is
do have
her.
to ask Ash a Max question. Ash, did you ever fantasize about the alien having sex with Sigourney Weaver? Because she was so hot in those little panties and that short white T-shirt. Be honest.
I fantasized more about there being a small Asian man in the costume having sex with Sigourney Weaver. Maybe he was a
Well,
set designer. I can get really involved with this.
Ash, I do have actually going back to that. Do you have a fear of what's about to happen to you and your wife?
I think I have a fear of any of the unknown elements. I
Hmm.
mean, so far all of our tests have said that we're going to have a healthy child, but I think that as a parent to be, that's probably my biggest fear.
Yeah.
Is that some kind of you know aberration? Something that's going to take this process and turn it into something that's fearful or something that's less than beautiful. I think that's probably more
Yeah.
of my fear is that or as a parent you always look at yourself. It's a time obviously of great reflection because you look at yourself and all these qualities that you don't want to be reproduced in someone else.
Right.
And obviously that's something that's not going to take effect till later, but you still just wonder how long does it take for these seeds of disposition to germinate. And that's sort of a scary
Yes.
thought.
So the fear is what it is that you're gonna you're gonna spawn, as opposed to the actual experience of the birth. Because I mean, I guess in retrospect, that you know I mean, it is frightful, but you realize that it's going to be over in a in a day or so, and then what you're going to be left with is going to last for forever. I mean, I guess that it's a little frightening
Well,
in a
interestingly
sense.
enough, years ago, when I was sort of unsure in my major and I was bouncing back and forth between schools, I decided at one point in time that I was going to take a very uh, old school Renaissance approach to being an artist, and I took a couple of cadaver dissection classes.
Mm.
So, strangely enough, the idea of like tissue and organs and things of that nature, I have more of a fascination than a distaste for. So I'm not really worried so much about what I'm going to see or how the process might affect me physically. Again, it's this idea that
The smell's rough. just,
I,
just interject right there.
I remember being told that as well. Joe was very pale for about a week afterward.
Well, it's all good until like the time. Listen, I can't believe I'm talking about
It's
this. It's
it's
all
all
good
very
until
appropriate.
the time comes, right? Like you're right there with her. You're being supportive and everything, and then all of a sudden the time comes, and then everything gets bared away, and then I was just remember being very aware of being studied by the two nurses in the room or whatever, like, all right, here it is. Here's the moment. What's he gonna do? And I was like, I was like, oh my god, this is a little bit overwhelming.
it's like
I was like,
you're crying at the experience, but something in the back of your mind said, "Who just threw up on hot trash?" Yeah.
yeah. But that said, yeah, man, I hear you. It is gonna be it's probably the single most beautiful thing that you'll ever experience, as ugly and horrifying as it is. But yeah, yes, the fear of bringing in a child, man. I don't want to get too far off the tangent here, but I hear you loud and clear, Ash.
And it might be a xenomorph. Who knows?
That's
That's
true
also
too.
one
That's
of my
true.
huge fears. Like this thing should be coming through the chest, right? So
Do you guys want to talk quickly about the cast, because we haven't actually talked about any of the human characters on board here. Anything to say? I mean, Sigourney Weaver. This was her first role, and she was actually brilliant. She's brilliant in it,
Yeah.
obviously. And I never knew how beautiful she was I guess when I was a kid. It just struck me
All
as
that shit
watching.
kind of goes over your head until you reach a certain age, you know?
Yeah, she's got a really striking look. I don't
Yeah.
know exactly what it is, but she really has just a face that really
Draws
that she,
your eye, and you can't. It's very sculptural, and I mean Ridley Scott has a knack
right.
for Numi Rapace and Prometheus has some similar qualities, but all of the actors that he works with, there's some, especially in the context of the Alien films, it sort of makes you reconsider the human facial structure a little bit. They're attractive, but it makes you notice things like the height of cheekbones and things like that.
Where she
It's a
has
very
very
interesting effect.
she has very aquiline features, but they're very plainer
Yeah.
too, and
Yeah.
they hold shadow real well. It's
Yep.
she does have very sculpturesque features. She really does.
yeah, she's pretty amazing. I mean, and one thing that he does in casting is, or they did with this one, I don't know if it was actually intentional or not, but everybody was not your typical young cast. Everyone's in their 30s and 40s.
That was, I think Ebert did, yeah, I remember reading Ebert's review and he pointed that out and I hadn't even really noticed that, but I mean, especially these days, it stands in such stark contrast because everyone looks like they're clipped out of a fucking catalog for,
Yeah.
Right.
board shorts. And, no one I think ever really gives Ridley Scott enough credit for his gift of casting. He really has a knack for it. And this movie, Tom Skerritt said, let's face it, this movie isn't about the characters, it's about the creature. And there was a lot of tensions and frustrations between the actors and Ridley Scott on this one, but they were amazing.
Yeah, it's about the creature, but yeah,
You have to
you
give a
stop.
shit
You
and you
don't.
have to be interested in the people, on board.
Yeah, and as much attention as you're giving to it's funny because I hadn't really think about this, but you're giving so much attention to that thing that's lingering in the shadows that you don't really contemplate them so much, but they're so good
Yeah.
that you just accept, you just accept
It's
them.
just such an effortless thing you see on screen, you know.
Yeah, and every single one of them is, I
Well,
mean,
and that's what I mean. That's the genius of that casting is that he put people in who he didn't have to worry about. You know, they're such consummate professionals that they're interesting. All they know how to do their job, and they know how to be interesting in front of a camera. You know,
yeah, and it's so nice to see, faces that are, on the side of human as opposed to mannequin
wrinkles
stuff.
and scars and shaggy hair and grime.
Yeah, I mean they're all good-looking people to a certain extent,
Yeah,
but they're good-looking in a human way, as opposed to, whatever.
Well, I think something
Twilight.
interesting to point out is a lot of the actors that we see today, and even some of the actors in Prometheus, are actors that seem to only exist for the camera.
Right.
These are faces that you can't really imagine existing outside of celluloid, almost because of this
yeah.
weird perfection that they
They
have.
could never work in an auto garage or drive a truck or
It
be
doesn't say blue collar.
actors. Yeah.
And we were,
Yeah.
with Alien, we were to get the idea that these were blue collar service professionals.
Absolutely. Yeah, in all the films almost, in all the Alien films, I think it's such a, it's his go-to archetype is the working class, the working class stiff, complaining about the working for the man kind of,
And he did a good job of letting the camera come into conversations. So
Hmm.
we
Very
knew that,
Altman.
right, there was a basis for these people existing outside of the POV of the camera. And I think that was a trait that we don't see very often in modern filmmaking because the event happens as we pull in,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the
hmm
events happening around the camera, and then the camera is allowed
Nothing
to settle on something.
nothing exists before or after the shot that you're watching, you know? Like those characters
Exactly.
don't exist but to say the dialogue they're saying in front of the camera. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
And
I
even
do
this
feel
weird kind of plastic beauty
yeah. Well,
really,
that's
pushes that forward.
my biggest beef with casting these days is that they just look like they're on like a teen drama, you know. But
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely feel that he lifted Altman-esque techniques for the dialogue scenes in this movie, which again lends it that air of, you just happen to be observing this taking place, you know.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you have a great ensemble cast.
I mean, how
Yeah.
many ugly actresses were up for the role that Charlize Theron had for Monster?
Uh,
Right.
yeah.
We're in this society now where it's like, listen, if we need an ugly character, we'll take
We're
someone
like,
Don't
who's
worry,
very
we'll
beautiful
manufacture one.
and
Can
we'll
I
turn them ugly.
Can I just step aside here and say, Yaphet Kotto, I never really paid attention to in this movie, and he is fucking hilarious in
yeah,
this
he's
movie.
great.
He like
Yeah.
almost steals the movie. Like as an adult now, like as a kid, he's just sort of an annoying. He's always bitching about getting paid and everything. And then as an adult, you just see like he's almost like I mean he almost does in this movie what Michael Fassbender does in Prometheus, where he's like, well, I know my job and I'm gonna have some fun with it. So he's always
But he
doing
still has
shit.
that jaded detachedness.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Any last words on Alien before we go to ratings, which we somehow left out of the Prometheus segment?
Do we want to cut that one? Do we want to do ratings on Prometheus and then slice it back in?
No, we're gonna assign. Here's how we're gonna do it here, guys. We're gonna give Artie. We're gonna all think about what Artie would rate Prometheus, and then average it out, and that'll be her rating. And then we'll give our ratings for Prometheus, and then we'll rate Alien. So let's do Prometheus first, and Artie first. Billy, what do you think Artie would give Prometheus?
She's a tough cookie. I'd say she'd give it 1 star.
Yeah,
One
Ash.
out of five, by the way.
Yeah,
Tomahawk.
1 out of 5.
Do we want to do a Tomahawk impression about? We have a rating system of 1 to 5.
We have a rating system of 5 stars here on the cutting room. Ash, what do you think Artie would give to Prometheus?
A drunken, stoned half star.
I think she would give it 1 star, so I think that's a 0.67 or
Somewhere around
maybe.
there.
I am going, Billy. Give Prometheus a rating.
Uh, Boy, that is a tough one. I didn't even give it any consideration. I would say, this is tough. I got to go with 2.5.
Ash.
There were actually elements that I liked, and I wasn't really that critical of this movie. I was entertained by it. I'll give it 3 stars.
3 stars. All right. I am going to give it 3 stars as well. I didn't have any expectations for except for exactly what it was, and though I was bummed out about the launching of a series as being the entire reason for this film's existence, I think it was a solid for what it was. I think it kind of achieved it. So three stars for
I
me.
would love to hear a Joe and Ash conversation on Prometheus because that last one was basically like a group of us descending with crowbars and bats on a bum in an alley and just beating the shit out of him for an hour. I think that Joe and Ash, you guys would have a really interesting conversation on that movie.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Listen, I was really pissed. The two things that pissed. Look, we're back talking about Prometheus. Look, we're back talking about Prometheus. The two things that pissed me off about it were the abortion thing, which I thought was just. I mean, I
You
think it was a complete contrivance, but it still didn't derail the movie because I thought the whole movie was basically a
It was pretty
contrivance.
incredulous from start to finish anyway.
Yeah, so it didn't ruin it. And that said, I thought it was pretty masterfully handled in a lot of ways. And the thing about franchise launches is that every film seems to be like a potential launch for a franchise.
Yeah.
They're just doing the Bourne identity. Like every movie that's out now, is basically trying to cash in on something. So, I mean, unless I'm renting it on Netflix and looking for a really good movie, I'm pretty much expecting, the Avengers and Prometheus and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer or Killer or whatever the hell.
Now, if we could get a deal where all three of those franchises intersect, now
That's
we
right.
would really have something to
And
work with.
then you get Spider-Man to jump into
Yeah,
the
we'll give a
middle
little
of-
competition for the Avengers.
Do you want to give a last justification for Prometheus since Billy opened up the door
Any
for
any
us?
last words on Prometheus, Ash?
I like the alien universe. I like the idea that there's this huge stage that's been set. Um, I like the art direction. I like the design. So
Yeah.
being able to sort of settle comfortably back into the universe for a couple of hours was pretty welcoming for me.
Here, 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 here. I completely agree with that.
And now fast forward right to Alien, or in reverse to Alien, and we're gonna give Alien a star rating. We have the 5-star rating here on the cutting room, and I will go to the Hangman, Ash Hamilton first. Ash, what did you rate this film?
I think it's seminal sci-fi horror. This is a quintessential film. There's been so much that has been built upon not just the series, but the idea of what the film represented and the kind of impact that it actually had on the genre. This is a 5-star movie for me. Always has been.
Woof. Billy, what do you got for me, brother?
You're doing a very good tomahawk impression right now, Joe. Without the gravelly, smoky thing, just like the intonation.
I'm
Spot.
falling into the rhythm here, Billy. I'm
Spot
falling
on.
into the rhythm.
Max has his work cut out now. There's two people who can make fun of the way Tom talks. I would say, it is so close to being a 5-star movie for me, but I got to give it 4.5. Just because of there's just something in me that pulls back a little bit, but it is a solid 4.5.
Yeah, and you know what? I there's a part of me that only wants to give it a 3-star, but it's not on the same level as Prometheus, so I need to go and give it a 4-star. I mean, it has a lot of the same pitfalls with using a lot of cliched devices of cinema and all that business, but it's obviously a way superior film than Prometheus. So 4 stars for me too. All right, guys, thank you for reviewing Alien. Up next is the sequel, Aliens. But first, we are going to go to our very own. I'm messing up on the. See, I'm stumbling over my own Tom rhythm here. We are going to go to our very own, the Hangman Ash Hamilton, and he is going to give us this week's Hangman's Noose. Take it away, Ash. and somehow it actually works really well as a pretty damn good film, even though I have my issues with it, obviously. But again, like Artie was saying earlier, I mean, it kind of seeped into my childhood world and kind of never let go, and it became a part of my own mythology in a lot of ways.
Yeah, do you, I mean, is it to the point where uh like you have a soft spot for the movie, or I mean, do you look at it now and it's just pretty much you view it with objective eyes and it's not.
No, I have my childhood associations with it for
Mhm.
sure, and they actually incorporate, my parents, because I remember my parents talking about the film, and then being allowed, incremental access to the film because they used to play it on HBO all the time. And one of
They would
those,
dole out like 5 minute clips at a time.
yeah, and I remember actually, my father and mother joking about, the everyone's seen it, so it doesn't matter about the spoiler. Is that scene at the dinner table,
Hmm.
and all this stuff, and then finally seeing it, and even knowing that him back on board with the spindly sucker still attached to his puss. This proves to be a grave mistake indeed, and for the rest of the film, the crew deals with the onboard terror the facehugger brings along with it. In one of the most terrifying scenes ever filmed, the facefucker spawns and its hostile progeny escapes into the bowels of the ship. Rattled and fighting amongst themselves, the crew attempts to track the alien bastard down and kill it, but it quickly becomes evident that the hunters have become the hunted. What's most striking about all this is the film's simplicity. What we have is essentially a tale that stretches across who knows how many light years, and the grandest existential implications, and it all happens essentially in 3 or 4 rooms of beeping lights. The narrative construct of Alien is so simple, in fact, that if you took away the space stuff, what you'd be left with is the formula of that simplest of all genre pictures, the slasher film. For most of the film, we hardly even see the xenomorph itself, aside from shadowy intimations and small sections of anatomy, and most of the deaths happen off screen. Leaning on fantastic special effects, cinematography, and production design, Scott knows how to use the devices of mainstream commercial cinema to great effect. And though most of these can be faulted as being hackneyed cliches, he gets them to work in the context of a common denominating bit of mindless blockbuster. But this is a compliment. Who else could use the search for a cat as a major narrative thrust and not have it become utterly ridiculous? But like I said, the real power of the picture comes in the fear of the unknown and the unseen. As adults, our boundaries are stretched beyond our childhood bedrooms, and our imaginations, if we're blessed, grow bigger than our dreams. As a species, we've traveled across continents and across great seas in efforts to come to terms with that unknown. And of course, we look with wondrous trepidation to the stars and planets and black holes and quasars and whatever the hell else might be lurking above our heads. But we can never, ever, not in a Google's of light years, be able to completely come to terms with space. Any answers we find will only bring with it a host of new, potentially horrifying questions. Out there, anything can happen. And the most terrifying part of that anything are the things that we can't even begin to dream of. Well, Ridley Scott dared to try and came up with a damn good way to while away a hot summer afternoon. So, Billy, you're our science whiz, and the tag of the film is this: in space, no one can hear you scream. But so Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien starts under your bed when you're a kid. You're staring up at the ceiling, but thinking about nothing other than what might be slithering just 2 feet under your head, ready to attack. It starts in that fear that every single one of us harbors in the most protected compartment of our souls. It starts in the fear of the unknown. When we catch up with the crew of Nostromo, they're waking up from their hibernation stasis in a tiny little corner of the infinite. Mother, the onboard ship's computer, has received what seems to be an SOS transmission, and the mission's protocol, though they're just a cargo ship, requires them to investigate. After some bureaucratic infighting, they agreed to double park their spaceship on a planet whose environment proves to be primordial. In a glaring turn of coincidence, they've landed miraculously close to what appears to be a broken down alien vessel. With their own ship damaged during the landing, the crew sets out on foot to investigate while the onboard mechanics make the necessary repairs. The explorers find the strange and wondrous remnants of the failed alien mission, and during the expedition, one of the crew is attacked by a crab-like something or other that wraps itself around his face and refuses to let go. The crew is afraid of contamination, but they eventually evidently you can hear it loud and clear when your ship explodes behind you, carrying an alien.
That
Is that
that's
true?
a scientific fact. That's been proven. It was there in the movie, man.
Mm.
Of course, it has to be real.
So how can they put the tagline as "No one can hear you scream in space," but then have a gigantic explosion happen right at the end of the
You
film?
are immediately getting sidetracked in unimportant minutia, Joe.
I guess that might be the case, man. Well, you know, the thing is that the film does do a lot of things with bigger, grander scale things, as I mentioned on
Yeah.
there. But you
We
know,
talked
on
about it
the
years ago, and your biggest beef has always been the essential sort of cheeseball nature of everything beneath the surface, which is, for instance, there's not one but two cats jumping out to scare people in the movie. And it's like you're on a spaceship, you go all the way to the ends of the cosmos, and two of your biggest scares are a cat jumping out. It's like cliches travel well, don't they?
Well, you expect the first cat.
right.
It's the second one that really takes you off guard.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean the whole film is basically built around them looking for the cat.